You ever pass by someone on the street and think you know their story? Just by how they look. The torn clothes. The worn-out shoes. That blank stare of someone who's seen too much. We walk by, we judge, and we never ask. But what if I told you the woman everyone mocked, pushed away, and treated like trash was actually the mother of 3 powerful CEOs? Yeah, let that sink in for a second. Because today, I'm about to tell you something that'll flip your world upside down. You came to this video for a reason, right? You saw the title. Everyone abused old beggar showed up at party, unexpected she's mom of 3 CEO. Situation reverses. And your curiosity got the better of you. You want to know how a ragged old woman, ignored and disrespected by society, ends up being the mother of not 1, not 2, but 3 corporate giants. You want to know who she is, where she came from, and how this whole unbelievable reversal happened. And guess what? I promise, by the end of this story, you're not just going to get your answer, you're going to walk away with something deeper. A new perspective. Maybe even a little guilt. And definitely a dose of respect for people you once looked right past. But before we get into it, let me talk to you directly. Yeah, you. Whether you're watching this while commuting, relaxing after a long day, or maybe scrolling through your phone at 2 a.m. trying to find something that actually makes you feel something, you're in the right place. This story isn't just some random drama to fill the silence. This is a mirror, a message, and maybe even a wake-up call. So take a deep breath, turn up the volume, and promise yourself you'll stay with me till the end, because I've got a master move coming your way. Something that'll hit your soul. Let's just say, the ending won't just surprise you, it might just change you. Now, let me set the scene. Picture this, an extravagant corporate party at a high-end hotel in New York. You know the type. Glass walls, golden chandeliers, waiters in tuxedos, fancy jazz music playing softly in the background. This wasn't just a gathering, it was a celebration of success. The 3 siblings, David, Emily, and Ryan, had just closed a billion-dollar merger. They were the talk of the business world. Young, rich, powerful, and seemingly unstoppable. Everyone in the room wore confidence, like it was custom-tailored. Laughter echoed, champagne flowed, and photographers captured every moment for the tabloids.
But no one saw what was coming.
Outside that luxurious hotel, in the cold wind of December, stood an old woman. Her clothes were layered but tattered. Her hands trembled not from age, but from the biting cold. She clutched a plastic bag that barely held anything of value. Her hair, gray and uncombed, blew across her face as she squinted up at the lights above. No one paid her any mind. In fact, when she tried to approach the entrance, she was met with sneers, insults, and even a guard pushing her away, threatening to call the cops. Get lost, lady. You don't belong here. But she stood her ground. Something about her eyes, sunken yet fierce, said she knew this place. Like she'd been here before. Or maybe like she had a right to be here. At this point, I want to ask you something. If you were one of those people at that party, dressed in designer clothes, sipping imported wine, would you have treated her any differently? Be honest. Would you have looked at her as a person or a problem? This isn't just a story about class or wealth. It's about truth, perception, and above all, family. And let me tell you this now. Nothing is as it seems. Now back to our story. Inside the hall, David was giving a speech. Handsome, confident, and charismatic, he was the face of the family business. To success, to legacy, and to the people who stood by us all these years, he said, raising a toast. The audience clapped, cheered, and admired the trio on stage. Emily, the middle sibling, poised and elegant, was busy managing PR as usual. Ryan, the youngest but arguably the brain behind their tech empire, stood beside them, silent, observant, but proud. Meanwhile, the old woman had managed to slip past the entrance during a moment of distraction. Some thought she was drunk. Others thought she was crazy. But none recognized her.
Not yet.
Not even her children. And here's the wild part. She recognized every single one of them. Her gaze lingered on David first, then Emily, and then Ryan. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just looked. like a mother seeing her children after decades. But they didn't see her. Instead, security noticed and rushed to her, causing a brief commotion. Everyone turned. Cameras paused. Conversations stopped. Emily frowned, annoyed by the disruption. David's face darkened, concerned about optics. Ryan just watched, unsure of what to make of the situation. The guard grabbed the woman's arm. "You don't belong here," he growled. And that's when she whispered something that dropped jaws and froze time. "I gave birth to those three. Every single one of them." Now, imagine that for a second. You're standing at a party with your coworkers, clients, investors, and a woman who looks homeless just claimed she's your mother. Your world doesn't just shift, it shatters. You see, this isn't just a case of mistaken identity. This is a story of abandonment, survival, betrayal, and redemption. But don't jump to conclusions yet. You haven't heard her side of the story. Not truly. And trust me, when you do, you might find yourself questioning everything you thought you knew about success, sacrifice, and what it really means to be rich. I know some of you are thinking, is this for real? How can someone's own children not recognize their own mother? And that, my friend, is the question that'll haunt you until you know the full truth. Because what happened next was a twist no one at that party or watching this video saw coming. And it all started years ago, with a decision that changed everything. She didn't flinch when the security guard grabbed her, didn't scream or make a scene like someone desperate for attention. Instead, she stood still, and when her lips moved, her voice, though raspy and tired, cut through the party's glittery silence like a blade. "I gave birth to those three. Every single one of them." The way she said it wasn't dramatic or loud, but haunting. Like it was a truth she had carried in her bones for decades. The crowd didn't know what to make of it. The music had stopped. The air felt heavy. Everyone's eyes darted between the stage and the woman, some amused, others annoyed, and a few genuinely shocked. David looked visibly shaken. Emily tried to whisper something to one of the PR staff, probably damage control. Ryan's stare never left the woman's face, a flicker of something, recognition maybe, flashing through his eyes before disappearing into confusion. And the old woman? She just looked at her children like a ghost from their past returning to collect a debt long overdue. You're probably thinking now, how in the world does something like this happen? How does a woman become invisible to her own kids? And why did she wait until tonight of all nights to reappear? Trust me, those questions are valid, and you're not alone in asking them. But let me take you back a little. Not to their childhood just yet, but to the months leading up to this very night. Because if you want to understand the mystery, if you really want the whole picture, you've got to follow the trail of dust and broken memories she left behind. The old woman's name was Margaret, though she rarely heard it anymore. Most folks on the street just called her Mags, or the Bag Lady, assuming she was just another forgotten soul drifting through alleyways and bus stations. But Margaret wasn't always like this. A year ago, she had a roof, crumbling, sure, but hers. A little studio apartment in the rougher part of Queens, filled with worn furniture, faded photo frames, and a box of letters she never had the courage to send. She didn't beg then. Not exactly. She survived on odd cleaning jobs, collecting cans, and doing laundry for old neighbors who still had a bit of kindness left in them. No one knew who she was before. No one asked. And Margaret didn't offer. Because when your own blood has turned their back on you, there's a certain silence that settles in your soul. It's not pain anymore, it's just emptiness. But something changed a few months ago. She started hanging around corporate plazas downtown. Not to beg, just to watch. She'd sit quietly near the fountains outside glass buildings, her eyes scanning faces as professionals rushed past her. One guard asked her once what she was doing. She simply said, "Looking for someone I lost a long time ago." She wasn't lying, because even if they had forgotten her, she hadn't forgotten them. She knew every detail: David's dimple when he smiled, the scar under Emily's chin from a childhood fall, the way Ryan used to hold her pinky whenever he was scared. She remembered it all. And each time she spotted their photos in newspapers or billboards or magazine covers, her heart sank a little deeper. They looked so different now. So powerful. So far away from her. And yet she couldn't stop herself. Something drove her forward. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe anger. Or maybe something much bigger was at play. Now here's where things start getting interesting. Around the same time Margaret began showing up downtown, strange rumors started swirling inside the siblings' corporate world. Whispers of a hostile takeover, mysterious emails with no traceable origin, and anonymous letters arriving at their offices with chilling lines like, "The past never forgets," and "A debt unpaid doesn't disappear, it waits." At first, they thought it was just business rivals playing games. Emily even blamed one of their competitors, a man named Carter Blackwood, known for his aggressive tactics. David dismissed it publicly but hired a private investigator in secret. Ryan, ever the observant one, started pulling up records from old storage drives, looking for connections, something that might explain the strange timing of it all. Here's where it gets even more bizarre. That private investigator? He found footage, grainy but clear enough, of Margaret loitering around their properties. Once near their downtown tower. Another time just outside a gala event they hosted in Brooklyn. In each case, she never approached them, never said a word, just watched, and vanished. When David saw the footage, he was disturbed, not because he recognized her, but because something about her eyes, her expression, felt familiar. Like déjà vu he couldn't place. Emily dismissed it again, insisting they focus on tightening security.
Ryan?
He didn't say much, but something in his silence said he wasn't so sure anymore. Then came the day Margaret slipped a note into their building's front reception. No name, just a message. "You're standing on bones you buried. The past is coming to collect." The staff dismissed it as nonsense. But to the siblings, it sent a shiver down their spine. Because the wording? It mirrored something their mother used to say when they were kids. Back when their lives were much, much different. Now, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, was Margaret simply a grieving mother desperate for closure?
Or was she planning something?
Maybe both? Or maybe someone else was pulling the strings. Because if you look closely, there were other signs, subtle but telling. A strange woman seen speaking to Margaret at a bus terminal. A man in a brown coat who seemed to shadow her movements. Even Margaret herself sometimes looked over her shoulder, like she was being followed. It's possible this wasn't just about the children forgetting her. It could have been about secrets that go far beyond abandonment. And let's not forget the media. Once the scene at the party went viral, because yes, someone filmed it, the video started trending almost instantly on platforms like TikTok and YouTube. Hashtags like #BeggarMom, #OhFamilySecrets, and #TruthRevealed exploded overnight. Influencers started theorizing. Reddit threads lit up. Some thought she was a con artist trying to blackmail the family. Others believed she was part of a bigger scandal. A few even wondered if she was telling the truth and the CEOs were hiding something dark about their past. But here's the thing no one could deny. She knew something. And whatever it was, it scared the siblings enough to delay a press conference the next morning. Emily claimed it was due to internal matters. David went silent on social media. Ryan was spotted leaving a lawyer's office with a look that said everything but peace. So here we are. A shattered party, a haunting reunion, and 1,000 unanswered questions. And just when you think you've got it figured out, just when you start piecing together motives, timelines, and possible lies, the story drops another layer. Because remember that man in the brown coat following Margaret? He wasn't just some stranger. He had ties to a facility upstate. A place where things were kept off the books. Records erased. Names changed. And as it turns out, he knew the siblings too. The morning after the party felt like the world had shifted. Newspapers ran with half-truth headlines like, "Homeless Woman Crashes Gala Claims Blood Ties to CEO Trio," and "Mystery Beggar Exposes Billionaire Family Secret." TikTok was drowning in reaction videos, with users dissecting every frame of the viral clip, zooming in on the siblings' faces, comparing old family photos, and speculating wildly. But while the internet fed off the drama, behind closed doors, something far more chilling was unraveling. Margaret, real name finally confirmed through an old ID found in a forgotten shelter locker, vanished the next day. Just disappeared. No one saw her leave. No security footage tracked her movements, and the shelter manager where she had stayed for a few nights claimed she left behind everything: clothes, meds, even a half-written letter addressed to my children. It was as if someone had erased her presence in one clean sweep. That's when Ryan started to panic. He was the quiet one, the thinker, the one who paid attention to patterns. And something about Margaret's disappearance didn't sit right with him. He dug back into the private investigator's files and noticed something off. The timestamp on the last photo taken of her didn't match the server records. It had been altered. Slightly, but enough to raise questions. He called the PI again, but the man was unreachable. His office voicemail simply said, "Taking an indefinite leave." No warning. No explanation. Just gone. Emily tried to downplay everything, urging her brothers to let PR handle it and stay focused on the merger. But David wasn't listening anymore. His instincts as the eldest kicked in. He remembered things now, small things. A lullaby hummed by a woman with tired eyes. The scent of lavender and smoke. A single time, during a thunderstorm, when he swore someone hugged him tightly and said, "No matter what they say, you are mine." He had spent his adult life burying that memory under ambition, champagne, and executive meetings. But now, it clawed its way back. They all began to ask questions, but it wasn't just about the woman from the party anymore. Because a box arrived at their headquarters 3 days later. No return label. Just a sleek black case marked with one word: evidence. Inside was a single flash drive. It contained surveillance footage of them as kids. Not the usual family videos, but shaky, grainy clips recorded through windows. In one of them, a woman, clearly younger, but unmistakably Margaret, was seen yelling at a man in a lab coat while clutching a baby. The audio was distorted, but certain words popped out clearly. "You said safe haven, not separation, and they'll forget me if you go through with this." It ended with her being dragged away by 2 men in uniforms. What was that place? Who was the man in the lab coat? David brought in a data analyst friend from his Harvard days to trace the video's origin. But within 48 hours, the analyst called and said he was backing out. "You didn't tell me this was that kind of situation," he said, voice shaking. "I'm not risking my career or my life. Whatever this is, it's way bigger than family secrets." Meanwhile, Emily received an anonymous envelope at her penthouse. Inside was a photograph, Margaret, sitting across a cafe table from someone who looked disturbingly familiar. The back of the photo had a scribbled note. "You think this is about you?" She was never alone. Emily tore it up instantly, but the damage was done. Someone was watching them. Someone wanted them to feel hunted. Then came the break-in. Ryan's apartment was ransacked while he was at a board meeting. Nothing of real value was taken, except for one item: the original copy of a letter he had stolen from Margaret's old shelter locker. The letter hinted at something deeply buried. It mentioned a place called Trenton Ridge, a name none of them recognized but which Margaret had underlined 3 times, followed by, "They made me sign it." I never agreed. When Ryan went to report the theft, the detective assigned to his case, a woman named Carla Monroe, seemed unusually indifferent. Almost too calm. She took notes, promised to follow up, but never called back. And when Ryan tried to reach her again a few days later, the precinct claimed there was no Detective Monroe on staff. That's when they knew. Someone was actively working against them. And then came the most disturbing revelation yet. While reviewing old family archives for any clues, David stumbled on a medical document buried deep in their father's files, one he had never seen before. It was dated over 30 years ago, marked confidential, authorized viewing only. The name on it wasn't Margaret's. It was Marissa Cole, a woman with no known background. A woman listed as the children's legal guardian for exactly 9 months before being replaced by adoption records linked to their current family name. The address on the form? Trenton Ridge Rehabilitation Center. So now, the question wasn't just, where is Margaret? It was, who is Marissa Cole? And what happened at Trenton Ridge all those years ago? And just when they were about to book a private investigator to travel upstate and check out the facility, Ryan got an email. No subject. No sender info.
Just a video clip.
It showed Margaret.
Alive.
And not alone. Someone was speaking to her, but their face was blurred and their voice distorted. The only clear words at the end of the video were, "You were warned not to come back. Now they'll pay the price instead." That was when the screen went black. And for the first time, the siblings realized this wasn't just about family. This was about a lie that started before they were even born. As the video clip ended and Ryan sat frozen in his dark office, phone trembling in his hand, David and Emily burst in after receiving his urgent text. But before he could even replay the disturbing message for them, Emily's phone buzzed sharply, flashing an anonymous notification, an image attachment with no text. She opened it slowly, and her breath hitched. It was a photo of her former college roommate, Hannah, someone she hadn't spoken to in years. But it wasn't the image that made her skin crawl. It was the timestamp. The photo had been taken only 30 minutes ago, just outside Emily's own apartment building. Hannah was standing on the curb, looking down at her phone, completely unaware she was being watched. Beneath the image, a single line of code appeared in the caption metadata. VXDREN #4179Ridge. The name Trenton Ridge again, but now paired with some kind of internal reference code, like a patient ID. This wasn't coincidence. This was calculated. Emily, shaken, confessed something she'd been hiding. Back in college, before she ever knew the truth about their family, she remembered Hannah getting obsessed with a conspiracy theory related to an off-the-record rehab facility rumored to have ties to secret behavioral modification trials in the late 80s. Hannah once told her that a woman she met during an internship at a legal aid clinic claimed her baby was stolen and replaced with a fake adoption contract signed under duress. At the time, Emily laughed it off, thinking it was one of Hannah's classic deep-dive rabbit holes. But now she wondered if that woman had been Margaret. Or Marissa. Or whoever she really was. Meanwhile, across the city, a new player entered the field. Jonah Vance, a 36-year-old freelance journalist known for his viral exposés on corporate fraud and suppressed medical studies, received a mysterious package at his Brooklyn apartment. Inside was a single yellowed page torn from a legal journal, highlighted with a name he hadn't seen since he started investigating the dark underbelly of forgotten mental health institutions. Trenton Ridge. Next to it, scribbled in frantic handwriting, was the line, "If anything happens to me, find Margaret." She was never insane. She was silenced. There was no return address, but Jonah recognized the handwriting. It belonged to his late sister, Eva, a former psych nurse who died under what was ruled an accidental overdose 2 years earlier. But Jonah had never believed it. She'd been sober for over a decade and paranoid about being followed in the weeks before her death. This note proved she'd still been digging into something dangerous, something that now connected to this viral family scandal that had the internet ablaze. As Jonah began to piece the puzzle together, someone else was pulling the strings. A man with no name, no digital footprint, and no consistent address, only referred to in whispers among ex-employees as the director. He was the one who oversaw all the patient transfers at Trenton Ridge, the one who ordered all records sealed after the facility was accidentally burned down in 1994. And now, with Margaret resurfacing, his name was being spoken again, quietly, and always followed by a warning. Back at corporate HQ, David received another package, this one containing a broken necklace and a torn piece of a child's drawing, water-stained and brittle. On the back, in faded crayon, were the words, "Mommy always said not to trust them when they smile too wide." That's when he remembered something odd about their adopted mother, how she always wore that same necklace until the day she lost it in a fire when they were 8. He now wondered if she'd ever told them the truth about where they came from, or if she, too, had been part of something darker. As he held the drawing, a shiver passed through him, not from the image itself, but from the faint smell it carried. Smoke. Old. Like it had been stored in a box for decades and only just resurfaced. And then came the contradiction. Ryan, still determined to find out the truth, managed to track down an old custodian who once worked at Trenton Ridge in its final years. The man, now living in a hospice facility, told Ryan something shocking, that Margaret hadn't been committed against her will. In fact, she chose to be there. Said she had to protect the truth by hiding in plain sight. The man rasped. Said if they knew where she was, they'd come for the kids. She stayed inside those walls long after the doors should have been locked. But how could that be? If Margaret chose to stay, why run now? Why emerge? Why crash the gala, reveal the connection, and vanish all over again? Suddenly, everything they thought they knew twisted into something murkier. Who was lying? Who was trying to help? Who had the most to lose if the truth came out? Because now, with journalists, anonymous threats, buried files, and family secrets erupting like landmines, it was no longer a question of who Margaret was. It was a question of what she was protecting. And just as the siblings began to share what they had found, a new email came in from an untraceable account. It contained only one thing: a scanned page from a psychiatric evaluation marked Patient 317, Margaret C., dated 2 years before the adoption was finalized. The summary read, "Subject claims all 3 children were subjects of Phase 2 conditioning trials. Delusions of conspiracy. Recommend long-term observation. Patient highly intelligent and manipulative." But in the corner, scribbled hastily in red ink, clearly added by hand, "They believed her. That's why they erased her." Just then, a power outage cut the lights in Ryan's apartment. A faint hum filled the silence. And somewhere, someone knocked 3 times. Ryan stood in the darkness of his apartment, heart thundering like a war drum in his chest, as the 3 knocks echoed again, slow, deliberate, and bone-deep. The power outage had thrown everything into a suffocating silence, save for the hum of something electrical still pulsing somewhere unseen. He grabbed his phone, the only source of light, and in its weak glow saw his front door, now slightly ajar. But he hadn't unlocked it. He was certain of that. And yet it stood open, like a cracked jaw waiting to devour. With each hesitant step toward the hallway, the temperature dropped, and a prickling sensation crawled across his skin like static. When he finally reached the door and flung it wide open, there was no one there. Only a flash drive taped to the floor with black electrical tape. The message was clear. Whoever was watching, they didn't just know where he lived. They could come and go as they pleased. Inside, David and Emily had barricaded themselves in the guest room, shaken by the sudden power loss and increasingly aware that this wasn't just about uncovering a buried family secret, it was about surviving it. When Ryan plugged in the flash drive, a video immediately started playing. Grainy footage, time-stamped from 3 nights ago, showed someone, Margaret, walking through the employee parking lot of one of their foundation's partner clinics. She wasn't alone. A man in a lab coat approached her, clearly arguing. The audio was distorted, but the subtitles beneath were chillingly clear, as if added after the fact. "You said they wouldn't remember. You promised. If they know, the trials collapse. You're putting us all at risk." Margaret didn't speak. She simply looked at him, handed him a small envelope, and walked away. Seconds later, the screen went black, and a new message flashed in red. "You dig, you die. Leave the past buried or join it." Emily felt like she couldn't breathe. Her mind flooded with fragmented memories, screaming in the middle of the night as a child, waking up to blood on her pillow with no idea why, and the feeling of cold, clinical hands holding her down while someone whispered that it's just the medicine helping you sleep. She'd always assumed it was fever dreams or some kind of night terror.
But now?
Now, she wasn't sure. Every so-called normal moment in their childhood felt suspicious in hindsight. The shots they received that weren't part of school immunizations, the unexplained days off from school that no one ever spoke about, and the behavioral check-ins, where a stranger in a white coat asked deeply personal questions that made no sense at the time. Could those have been remnants of something darker? Conditioning trials? Brain experiments masked as therapy? She didn't want to believe it. But she also couldn't deny the unease in her bones anymore. Then came the text message, this time on David's phone, from an unknown number. It was a live photo, Jonah Vance, the journalist who had reached out just hours ago, tied to a chair in what looked like an abandoned hospital room. His mouth gagged, his face bruised, eyes swollen shut but unmistakably conscious. Behind him, scrawled in red on the decaying wall, were the words, "He talked. Now you choose." The timer at the bottom ticked down ominously, 3 hours left. But no instructions, no ransom demand, no follow-up. Just the terrifying implication that they had the power to make people disappear without a trace. Panic was no longer a background noise. It was full-blown sirens inside Ryan's head. He locked the doors, checked the windows, and still felt exposed. Their safe spaces were gone. Their phones were compromised. Even their memories weren't entirely theirs anymore. He looked at his siblings, trying to stay composed for them, but his mind was spinning. Who could they trust now? The police would call it a domestic issue or label Margaret a mental case again. The media would twist the story into viral bait with no depth. This was bigger than public scandal. This was orchestrated silence. Deep state-level cover-ups. Government contracts. Pharmaceutical giants. Experimental psychiatry rebranded as family wellness programs. The rabbit hole had no bottom. Then came the breaking point. As Emily went to the kitchen to get water, she noticed the family photo wall had been tampered with. Several frames had been moved, but more disturbing, one was missing. The photo of them as kids, aged maybe 5 or 6, standing with a woman who wasn't their adoptive mother, nor Margaret. A different woman entirely. One they didn't recognize. The frame was gone, but the hook still dangled, empty. On the table below, laid out like a challenge, was a folded piece of paper. On it, in smudged pencil, was a single question. Who do you think she really is? As David stared at the note, something inside him cracked. He remembered the woman now, not from the photo, but from a recurring dream he'd had since childhood. A dream where he was walking through a hallway with flickering lights, calling for his mom, and being led away by a woman who smelled like antiseptic and roses. In the dream, she always smiled too much. Too wide. The kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. And just before waking, she always whispered the same thing. "You belong to the program now." He chalked it up to nightmares. But what if it had been more than that? What if it was a repressed memory trying to claw its way to the surface? And as the three of them sat together, the weight of paranoia and truth pressing like a vice, another email hit Ryan's inbox. This time, it contained an audio file. They played it, and immediately Emily turned pale. It was a recording of a therapy session, her voice at age 10, answering questions she had no memory of. "Do you still see the shapes when you sleep?" a male voice asked gently. "Yes," child Emily replied. "They try to talk to me. But Mommy said if I tell anyone, they'll take me away again." Then static. Then silence. And in that moment, the siblings realized something horrific. This wasn't about who Margaret was anymore.
It was about what they had been.
And just before the video ended, another face flickered across the screen. A security camera snapshot showing a shadowy figure watching them from across the street. Not just watching. Waiting. Just when it felt like everything was spiraling out of control, when the fear had lodged so deeply in their bones that even silence felt like screaming, the truth came knocking, but not in the way anyone expected. It wasn't through some dramatic confrontation or anonymous package. It was a simple, unassuming email from a contact listed only as Aunt Maggie, a name none of them remembered using. Attached was a single document, a PDF with a cryptic title, Patient Intake, Project Echo/Classified. David opened it with trembling hands, and what spilled onto the screen shattered everything they thought they understood about Margaret, about their past, about themselves. The file wasn't about her. It was about them. Emily's name was there. Ryan's. Even his. Each followed by coded data, behavioral markers, and annotations. The kicker? Their birth dates weren't what they'd always believed. The records showed they'd been registered under different names, experimental subjects in something called the Echo Resilience Protocol. Trial number 7C013. Under the category, Post-Trauma Behavioral Conditioning and Identity Overwrite. What did that even mean? Ryan sat frozen as his world unraveled. Wait, are you saying we weren't adopted because we were abandoned? We were taken because we were chosen. The document hinted at something more sinister than just a cover-up. It wasn't just about hiding the truth. It was about replacing it. Margaret hadn't been a failed mother or even just a woman trying to reconnect with her kids. She had been their handler, assigned to them as part of the second phase of the project. She wasn't at the party to beg for help. She was trying to warn them. And when they pushed her away, laughed at her, dismissed her as nothing more than a delusional homeless woman, she left without telling them the one thing that could have stopped what was coming next. The knock on the door jolted them out of their stunned silence. It was past midnight, and no one should have been visiting. They looked at each other, unspoken agreement between them not to answer. But the door opened anyway. A tall, composed woman stepped inside, flanked by two sharply dressed men.
Her voice was calm, too calm.
"Hello, children," she said. "It's been a while." The woman was the same person from the missing photograph. The stranger with the antiseptic and Rose's smile. Only now, she wasn't just a figment of David's dream or a blurry figure from the past. She was real, and she knew everything. "You've been busy," she said, glancing at the open laptop. "That was not meant for your eyes." Ryan stepped forward, his voice cracking with defiance. "Who are you?" Her eyes glittered in the dim light. "Let's just say, I'm the reason you're still alive." What followed next twisted every fiber of their reality. She explained that Project Echo was never a failure. It had been paused. The children involved weren't abandoned test subjects. They were meant to be activated later in life, when their mental conditioning had matured. Their normal childhoods, the adoption, the therapy sessions, it was all curated, tailored to simulate healing and family attachment. The idea wasn't just to study resilience, but to engineer it. The CEOs they had become weren't a coincidence. They were a controlled result. Trained to rise, to lead, to dominate.
Why?
Because they were part of a larger plan, one that extended beyond pharmaceuticals or behavioral science. It was about shaping influence, quietly building a generation of elite decision-makers conditioned from childhood to align with a hidden agenda. And now that they'd discovered the truth, that made them unstable assets. Risks. Emily couldn't breathe. Everything she had fought for, every sacrifice she'd made, every piece of herself she'd believed she earned, it was all part of someone else's experiment. And worst of all, the stranger had the audacity to smile and say, "You should be proud. You're our most successful case." The woman gave them a choice: return to the fold, undergo memory repair, resume their roles, or be erased. There was no gray area, no safe middle. But before she could finish her pitch, Ryan's laptop pinged. A new video file had appeared, untraceable in origin. They played it, and suddenly Margaret's face filled the screen, clear, alert, and nothing like the disoriented woman they'd seen at the party. "If you're watching this," she began, "then they've come for you. And I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. But I had to wait. You weren't ready." Her voice cracked, genuine emotion bleeding through. "You were never experiments. That's what they want you to believe. You were rescues. They took you from something far worse." Before she could explain more, the screen went black. And in that pitch-black silence, they all asked the same question without saying it aloud. What could possibly be worse than this? Everything was unraveling at a speed none of them could control. The laptop that had once been their lifeline now felt like a loaded weapon, feeding them pieces of a puzzle they no longer wanted to solve. The recording of Margaret had lit a fuse under everything they thought was true, but the explosion it triggered hadn't even begun to show its full force. Within hours, the world around them began to collapse. First, Ryan's bank accounts were frozen without explanation. Then Emily's assistant, someone she'd trusted for over 5 years, vanished, leaving behind a cryptic voicemail that simply said, "They're watching. I couldn't stay." The more they tried to contact anyone from their past, the clearer it became. They were being cut off, digitally erased one account at a time. Every text undelivered. Every email bouncing back. Their lives weren't just being monitored, they were being deleted. The betrayal came fast and brutal. David, desperate for answers, reached out to the one person who had always been a constant, James, their longtime legal advisor and family friend. They met in an old diner on the outskirts of town, far from cameras, devices turned off and buried in the glove box. James seemed calm, too calm. He let David talk, let him explain everything, nodding like someone who already knew the story. Then, halfway through his coffee, he slipped David a small black flash drive and whispered, "You have 12 hours. After that, I can't protect you." When David demanded an explanation, James leaned in and said something that chilled his blood. "You were never supposed to find out. None of you were. This thing, it doesn't end with you. It never did." Back at the safe house, they watched the contents of the drive together. The files weren't just about them. They were about dozens, hundreds of others. CEOs, senators, surgeons, professors. All of them had eerily similar childhood histories, foster care placements, obscure educational scholarships, sudden success with no clear source of backing. The Eco-Resilience Protocol wasn't a project.
It was a pipeline.
A long-term social engineering program run by a shadow initiative labeled only as the Foundation. And it had been active for over 40 years. Every face in those files had been conditioned, placed, and guided like chess pieces. Margaret had once been part of it, but somewhere along the line, she went rogue. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was love, but she had tried to undo what she helped build. And that's when it hit them. The Foundation didn't want to erase them because they were a threat to a project. They wanted to erase them because they were the proof that it existed. It got worse. One of the faces in the files was someone they all knew. Someone who had been there at the party. Someone they'd hugged, joked with, leaned on. Emily zoomed in, her voice faltering. No, that can't be. Not her. It was Jessica, her business partner, her best friend since college. She had been assigned to Emily from the start, placed in her dorm room as a random roommate, encouraged to join the same major, even co-founded their now multi-million-dollar brand together. But she was an embedded handler, tasked with keeping Emily emotionally balanced, compliant, productive. The realization crushed her. All the memories, all the late-night talks, every ounce of trust, it was all part of the design. Emily broke down, shaking as the weight of the betrayal settled in her chest like lead. They didn't have time to mourn. That night, while packing to relocate, their car was rammed off the road by an unmarked SUV. David blacked out. When he came to, they were in an abandoned warehouse, bound, blindfolded. The woman from earlier, the one from the photograph, stood in front of them again, this time without the warm pretense. "You've gone too far," she said coldly. "But you already knew that." A heavy pause filled the air, the kind that comes before the crash. You think you're heroes in some tragic origin story. You're not. You're just variables in a system too big for your egos to grasp. Her voice sharpened. "This isn't personal. It's progress." But then something strange happened. As she turned to leave, a voice echoed from a speaker above them. It was Margaret again, live this time. "They found the others," she said, and her voice cracked with both terror and hope. "You're not alone. The system is failing." The woman froze mid-step and, for the first time, looked genuinely afraid. That one sentence changed everything. Maybe the Foundation wasn't as invincible as they claimed. Maybe there were cracks in their perfect order. Margaret had sent the message from somewhere inside their network. She was alive. And more than that, she had help. Suddenly, it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about fighting back. But before they could speak, the lights went out. A single gunshot echoed in the dark. And someone screamed, and the crushing darkness of the warehouse. The single gunshot was followed by the chaotic thud of bodies scattering. Screams echoed off the concrete walls, footsteps scrambled for cover, and the smell of cordite hung thick in the air. David's heart pounded against his ribs like a war drum. He crawled instinctively toward where he'd last seen Emily and Ryan, whispering their names under the deafening silence that followed the shot. When the emergency lights flickered back on, painting the room in a sickly red glow, he saw Ryan hunched over, clutching his arm, blood seeping through his fingers. Emily was crouched near an overturned table, her face pale but alert. But the woman, the one who delivered threats like prophecies, was gone. No body, no blood, nothing. Only a cracked earpiece left behind, and the heavy thud of a metal door slamming shut in the distance. Margaret's voice returned on the speaker, trembling but resolute. "They're in chaos. You have to move now." Her coordinates blinked across a nearby laptop screen, an abandoned satellite relay station 30 miles north. That was where she'd been hiding. That was where it would all come to a head. Despite Ryan's injury and the exhaustion clawing at their bodies, they knew they couldn't stop. Not when the answers were within reach. They left the warehouse behind, its shadows still full of half-formed threats, and sped into the night, the road winding through backwoods and forgotten highways. The deeper they went, the more isolated they felt, as though they were being funneled into a trap they couldn't see until it was too late. The station sat like a relic of Cold War paranoia, its dish tilted skyward like a fossil frozen mid-scream. They entered through a shattered glass panel and found Margaret waiting in the control room, surrounded by wires, servers, and rows of old CRT monitors. Her eyes were bloodshot, face gaunt, but she stood tall. "They didn't want me to survive," she said before they could speak. "But I had insurance." With trembling hands, she loaded a final video file onto the monitors, surveillance footage, documents, and confessions stitched together into one horrific truth. The Foundation hadn't just manipulated lives. They had built an underground neural influence operation. Every CEO, every politician they groomed, was hardwired with behavioral triggers through experimental childhood trauma programs masked as therapy and education. It wasn't mentorship, it was mind control. And the siblings were meant to be the crown jewel of it all, the perfect, unsuspecting prototypes. The final twist came as the video rolled. James, the family's trusted legal advisor, appeared on screen. But not as a victim, as a founder. The man who had handed David the drive wasn't trying to help. He was initiating the final phase. His warning wasn't to protect them. It was to manipulate them into releasing the very information he needed buried under chaos. The flash drive's files were not exposure, they were a diversion. A narrative planted to make them think they had the truth while the real operation, a deeper network called Siren, continued to expand. "You were never the threat," Margaret whispered. "You were the bait." And then, the betrayal clicked into place. Jessica,
James.
Even some of the people they'd passed on the road. Their lives had been surrounded, not by allies, but by monitors. Emily collapsed onto a chair, breathless. "Then what's the truth?" she asked. "What do we do now?" Margaret turned slowly to them, her eyes welling with tears. "We become what they feared. We take back control." But the room suddenly shook with a deep rumble, and all screens went static. Outside, headlights pierced the darkness. Convoys approaching fast. Sirens weren't just the name of the operation now. They were real. The Foundation had found them. David, with seconds to decide, grabbed the only hard drive Margaret hadn't touched, shoved it into his coat, and ran with the others through the back tunnels of the station. Gunfire erupted behind them. Margaret stayed, barricading the door. Her final words echoed in their ears as they fled. "Tell the world. Even if they don't believe you at first, tell them." The trio emerged into the night, wounded, hunted, but alive. They didn't know where they were going next. They didn't know who they could trust. But, for the first time, they knew what they were fighting. And then, just as they reached the tree line, a phone buzzed in David's pocket. Unknown number. A video message. He played it.
It was James, smiling.
"You did exactly what we hoped you would. Phase 2 begins now." Screen fades to black. The days that followed were anything but peaceful. David, Emily, and Ryan vanished from the public eye, slipping between safe houses, changing identities, and keeping to the shadows. The Foundation had gone dark, its operatives buried so deep in legitimate corporate and government systems that they couldn't be pulled out without unraveling the country's infrastructure. But something had changed. The siblings were no longer the pawns. They were the wild cards. With Margaret's hidden drive decoded, they finally had undeniable proof. Childhood photos cross-referenced with military records, audio tapes from experimental therapy sessions, confidential reports, and names, hundreds of names, of children who had been reprogrammed under the guise of elite mentorship. It was evidence too powerful to deny and too dangerous to release all at once. So, instead of dumping it to the media, they devised something bolder. They embedded fragments of the truth into trending content, podcast interviews, viral videos, encrypted TikTok stories, live stream rants that seemed unhinged until they lined up with hidden metadata from the files. It was a puzzle made for the masses, and the internet, curious and hungry for controversy, began to solve it. David watched from a quiet cabin in the Rockies as hashtags began to trend. Hashtag mind control exposed. Hashtag Project Siren. Hashtag who are those? Most dismissed it as another conspiracy theory, but enough people dug deeper. Some of the victims who'd grown up under the Foundation's hand began to speak out. Whistleblowers started coming forward anonymously, confirming the web of influence. It wasn't a revolution, but it was a beginning. And as public interest grew, those in power had no choice but to address the noise. Investigations opened. PR firms scrambled. Boardrooms filled with panic. One by one, the Foundation's pillars began to crack. But the siblings knew better than to believe the fight was over. The scars from their childhood, memories of blank rooms, triggered responses to music tones, sudden panic attacks when hearing certain phrases, reminded them that the system was far more sophisticated than anyone realized. The Foundation hadn't disappeared. It had just shifted, adapted, burrowed deeper into institutions too sacred to question: charities, tech startups, youth development programs. Even now, they suspected James was watching from somewhere, calculating the next move, waiting for the world to forget again. Yet amid all that uncertainty, there was something David found for the first time in years: peace. Not the kind that comes from safety, but the kind that grows from clarity. He finally knew the truth about his mother, about the broken woman who'd shown up at the gala humiliated and ignored, only to be revealed as the person who had tried to protect them all from the beginning. Her silence had been the cost of survival. Her homelessness was not failure, but sacrifice. She had lived off the grid to stay alive and hide the last traces of the Foundation's control over her mind. When David visited her grave, he didn't cry. He simply sat for hours and told her everything they had uncovered, everything they had survived, and everything they were still fighting. A part of her legacy still burned inside him, something the Foundation couldn't erase. Ryan returned to his work, but not as a CEO. He disappeared into community projects, helping other at-risk youth avoid the same fate they had narrowly escaped. Emily began documenting their story in encrypted videos, coded for those who could recognize the signals. They didn't need fame or revenge. They needed to outlast the machine. And they were starting to realize, the more they shared, the less power the darkness had. Months passed. Then a letter arrived. No return address. No fingerprints. Just a single sheet inside that read, "You've made it interesting. We're watching." Beneath the typed words was a symbol, a black circle with a vertical line through it. David had seen it once before, on the flash drive James gave him, the one that started it all. He didn't panic. He simply folded the letter, burned it in the fireplace, and walked outside into the fresh air. The world hadn't changed overnight. The bad people still had power. The good people still doubted themselves. And the systems built on control and fear were still deeply rooted. But something was different now. A ripple had started. People were asking questions. Secrets were unraveling. And 3 siblings who had once been manipulated by shadows were now moving freely in the light, watching, waiting, and refusing to be silenced. So, the next time you scroll through a viral video that feels just a little too specific, a podcast guest who mentions the word siren, or a trending story that vanishes after an hour, ask yourself, was it a coincidence or was it a message? Because some stories aren't just meant to be told. They're meant to wake people up. And you, watching this right now, you're already part of it.